Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Rants and Airsofter. As always, I am Commander Killjoy, and this is
General Mills.
from T6 Back, and we're just going to go over today PolarStar builds. Now, whenever I kind of approach this topic, I'm always got to be extremely tactful in how I talk about it, because I realize it can really upset a lot of people and get mad, and I have to honestly say I was very biased when this first came out. I have to say that there have been massive improvements to it. There have been a lot of good retailers that have been coming out that really know how to fix them and work on them and adjust them properly. And that's something that needs to be said, because when these things first came out, I was hearing nothing but stories all over the place of them going down everywhere. Even the guy who runs Zulu 24 was telling us about, like, when he first had it, he's like, it worked fantastic for when it worked. And that's the thing that I always heard that I didn't like. I mean, me personally, I think they feel a very effective and efficient roll, especially if you want to run like a support gunner setup. If you want to run a support gunner setup and have a kind of box mag that has the custom capability of being able to crank out rounds and feed it without misfeeding, that's probably the best thing. That's what I see it as. Like 65 rounds per second of like thousands of rounds in a box mag it's pretty sick. Like, we don't have anything in the military that shoots anywhere near that fast. That's kind of like where I see it as, because, you know, I don't know, I just seeing it on something like an M4 and an M4 and a KWA, an M4, or like an AK, or like a submachine gun or anything along those lines. I just feel it's a little overkill. I mean, what do you think? You're the one that actually. I don't have one.
Well, I had mine. For those of you who have seen me on the field with it, it was a beta project that I put a PolarStar engine in, and it was a love-hate relationship with it. And the one thing I did love about it is that I could just unload and not have to worry about my gearbox or anything. And I didn't have any problems with my PolarStar, like, functioning wise.
Yeah.
It actually performed for the whole time that I had it. I never had any malfunctions.
Yeah.
However, because of the gun that I had, it was a beta project. It's very custom, and it didn't want to take the PolarStar engine easily. Didn't want to go down without a fight. And I actually had to get it fixed 6 times before it actually worked. So
and that's what I was talking about as far as people that now know how to work on them, because I've seen setups now where, you know, I'm really looking to get into the airsoft retail industry, and my partners as well, and we're gonna be talking more about that in the future when everything gets set up and it's all copacetic. But the thing that I've noticed is that there was not a lot of retailers that really knew how to work on them, at least in our area, I have to say.
Yeah.
Initially. Now there's Airsoft, there's Airsoft Junkies, there's PolarStar itself. All are companies that do the setups very well, and they're very capable of being able to make sure that it works in conjunction with what you're trying to do with it. And a lot of those guys now make crazy custom parts for it. Like, I know Airsoft does some crazy machine custom parts with changing out different things and making effective setups. And General Mills didn't tell me about Airsoft Junkie, so I didn't know about it until he mentioned it to me about a couple minutes ago. They have some insane custom PolarStar builds. Like, I saw the pictures of it; they look really nice. So it really just comes down to, like, people that have the knowledge and the effectiveness of how to do it. And probably one of the coolest things that I like about PolarStar is it's a great way to bring paintballers into the airsoft industry. And that's something that, like, I know it sounds kind of weird, but it works really well. Like, think about it. You're a paintballer, you have a rig, you have a regulator, you have an air tank, and you want to get into airsoft. Well, instead of going ahead and just going through a whole new setup and a whole new, like, you know, thing, now you could just basically go ahead and still keep your system, right? You know,
not necessarily.
No?
No. If you have a paintball gun that runs on high pressurized air, then you're okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
A lot of paintball guns run on CO2 still.
Oh, okay.
But if you have an HPA setup, you can use the tank. However, you need to buy the regulator, and you'd also need to buy the PolarStar engine. and you'd also need the battery, and you'd have to install it all. But you got to realize if you're not a paintballer, because not a lot of airsofters know about this, is that those tanks last 5 years, and then you have to get them hydro tested, and you get them hydro tested twice. So that means you get 15 years out of a tank, and then you have to buy a new one. And so that's, I spent $200 on my tank, so you're spending $200 on a new tank every 5 years, and if it starts leaking, you have problems. Also, you have to get your tanks filled every time you go to the field, which that's $5 roughly each tank. So that's another thing, and then you have to find a place to go fill them. So it's not like a normal AEG where you could just charge the battery at home. A PolarStar, you have to charge the battery to power the FCU, and you also have to get your tanks filled. Other than that, though, I really love the functioning of it. I love the fact that I didn't have to really worry about, babying it along, that I could put it on full auto and mow a whole group down and not really, feel too bad.
Other than the rage kills.
Yeah,
because I also heard that the thing, and this was something that I saw in a recent amped airsoft video, was how there's more air being behind it, and even if it's not necessarily at the same velocity, it'll hit harder.
Yeah, it carries a lot more energy because you can adjust the settings on the FCU, and I remember I did that with my PolarStar, and I hit some guy, and I just remember him screaming at me.
Yeah.
And I didn't, think anything of it. I was like, I hit the guy right in the chest, but the PolarStars carry a lot more energy, and the reason that does that is because the nozzle, unlike an AEG, when you shoot an AEG, the nozzle shoots the air and that's it. All the air that's in the cylinder. A PolarStar, however, you can adjust the settings that the nozzle stays locked forward and it keeps blowing air down the barrel, which will accelerate that BB.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is, I don't know how it happened, but I was shooting .25s out of my PolarStar, and it was coming in at 397.
Yeah.
And then I was shooting 3.2s, and it was only at 380. And so that's because that air in the barrel stays behind the BB and propels it. And so even with heavier weight BBs, I was still, I wasn't losing that much FPS when it came to changing weights. And that's why heavier BBs work really well with PolarStars. But, it pisses some people off.
Yeah.
And then there,
which is understandable, too, because some of those things crank out 65 rounds per second, 50 rounds per second.
And also, some people, they hate the fact that PolarStar users do that. Some people hate 50 rounds a second. What do you need that for? Well, you know what? I never did that. I actually used my PolarStar. It was at 17 rounds a second, which that's really nothing. It was an AK.
Yeah.
Most AEGs that you see on the field shoot faster than my PolarStar did. But the thing is that those guys who are using it at 50 rounds a second, let them do it. They run out of air faster. Also, they're using a lot more BBs. But you know what? To take their side for a second, if you think about it, you're in the woods and you're shooting through brush, heavy brush,
yeah,
and you shoot 50 BBs at one guy in a spray, maybe 3 or 4 of them might get through that brush and hit them, that really helps when you're behind heavy cover.
Yeah, and that also helps for suppressing guys, and that's what I see it as, is like a very effective suppressing tool. Or if you're trying to get insane DMR standings, is because if you guys ever watch Cafe Racing's videos or anything like that, he does a really good effective job if he made a custom HK417 PolarStar. That was such a great system that worked, and I think that's something that was really cool because he was able to carry it, didn't have to worry about carrying a tank on his back. He custom fitted the tank to a stock, and he would just crank out rounds with it. And yeah, so I think that's probably one of the cooler aspects of it is it's such an effective spray and pray tool. I think and that's what why I don't think that it's a stupid device. I don't think that at all. And trust me, I don't care how many times people shoot me. I really don't. He'll tell you, I jump into firefights all the time, and I don't care. I don't care if I get hit. And I've gotten hit with I got hit with guns that are 650 FPS. I don't care. it's just like, I understand why with a lot of people it's like it hurts, like, but again, it's also the nature of the game. Like, you're gonna get shot. It's going to happen. You're gonna get hit. You're gonna have to walk out. You're gonna have to do all these things. Like, it just, and you can't, and I can't knock an entire industry or a new side in which the PolarStar system is coming out, because it's an effective setup and it works. I just personally prefer it more in the support role, and like if I was going to get one and dump that much money into it, I would dump that money into a support weapon so that I could actually take it with me to Milsim events. Because if I'm gonna have it as a support weapon, I might as well be able to use it no matter where I go. I might as well be able to use it at an event. I might as well be able to use it at a regular airsoft field. That's where I would get it. It just makes sense. Obviously you got to build up the. Some of those things are heavy, but like at the same exact time, like that tank is heavy too. I remember you used to tell me like when he switched from that to his KWA, M16. What was it? KMBR. M16. Like he was like, wow. It's so nice not having a tank on your back.
And then try switching to a GHK G5.
Yeah.
That thing,
was like
I would
2
fly.
pounds. Yeah, it was 2 pounds. Like, it was ridiculous. And all the weight was in the mag. Put the mag in, it's like, oh, that's where those other 4 pounds go.
And
but it's
the Crytek, too.
Oh, my God. Your Crytek is so light.
Yeah, like, you have no idea. If you've never picked up a Crytek before, I recommend you go do it. And you're going to be like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, you would actually wonder if the internals are in there.
Yeah, and I think probably one of the other cool things about the PolarStar is that is how it's a very cool system if you want consistency. If you use gas, the problem with the gas is that, like, and we talked about this in our hop-up video, if you guys saw that, was how the temperatures fluctuate, and there's a lot of factors that are involved with gas guns. Like, what's the material of the gas gun made out of? Does it have recoil? Does it not have recoil? Those all come into account, because if your gun's made out of plastic, it's not going to absorb the cold as much. And if it doesn't have recoil, there's not going to be as much energy that's behind it in order for it to shoot. So those are all things that come into effect. But but eventually, still, you're going to have to recharge your gas, and you're going to slowly lose it over time. No different like airflow, but at least with the high pressure air, it's a lot more consistent.
Oh yeah, when I was chronoing, it was like 3.7. Well, actually, when I was shooting 3.2, it was like 384. 384, 384, 383, 384, 385, 384. It was just like 1 FPS plus or minus is nothing.
Yeah, especially when you consider with AEGs, where like, if you're really good with like a system and like you're really good with an AEG setup, you can get those where it's between like 3 FPS. Like it's like it'll be like 401, 402, 403, or 402. If you really know it, like if you're on if you're an airsoft mechanic and you know what you're doing. But for the average player, there's huge consistencies. Well, not huge, but like it's by 5 or 6 or 7. Like it jumps all over the place, and that's something that I really like with the PolarStar setups, is that, especially like as opposed to using a gas setup, is your consistency. Is your gun is going to be affected by how much gas, how much pressure you have, but in your magazine. And the more rounds you use, the more of a differentiation you're going to see with gas than you would with PolarStars. I know like your tanks are empty, but they still shoot close to the same, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing that I like about it. All right, it doesn't work on it. It works on high pressure air, not expanding air. So when you use a gas gun, that works on expansion of air. So like anything like what's it called, like propane or green gas or mapping gas, that stuff works on expansion of air. And that's a problem when like all of a sudden the air pressure starts to differentiate, because the pressure you're using more and the gas is being limited. So if you want like something like an airsoft sniper rifle or like an airsoft rifle, like that's the thing. Like I would, as much as I would prefer having an HPA setup with a support weapon, and I think that's my preferred thing that I would get it for. I understand why people get it in AEG, in M4s and AKs, because the gas blowback systems that you use, there's so many variables that are consistent in it, where your FPS will differentiate. Now, don't get me wrong. What's the benefit? The benefit is if you have a gas gun, especially if it's in a warm environment, you're going to do so much better, and your FPS is going to crank out a lot harder.
It's also more realistic.
And it's more realistic. But yeah, it's a lot more realistic. Although now I've seen like the Tippmann setups with the recoil, but I'm still hearing it's nothing like an LM4. Um, and essentially like the thing is that when it's more like on par with like an ERG, and probably the system like that's the benefit to it, you know. But obviously the drawbacks is you can take your HPA setup and bring it into, you know, cold weather. You can bring it where it's really cold and use it.
Yeah, it was awesome that I could just take it to the field in the winter. It still functions just like it does in the summer. No difference whatsoever.
Yes, and that's probably where like I really see that it shines is the consistency and the ability to use it from round 1 to round 5,000, and your consistency rarely changes. And that's what I think is a great setup about it. Like when I first came out, I'm going to be honest, I was a huge hater of them. But now that I'm starting to see them, you know, and really coming out, they're really efficient. And now you have the Wolverine S&P setups, you have the Valken setups, the Tippmann setups, the new the what's it called, the PolarStars setups, but now with the F1 Fusion with that little tiny thing that's this big that you can drop in any gearbox and you don't have to worry about getting a new gearbox shell anymore. It's all in that little tiny system.
It probably costs a lot less too.
Yeah, it probably costs a lot less. So I feel sorry for those first gen PolarStar users because now you have this little thing that you could drop in anything and you're good to go. You know.
Got rid of mine.
I know. So,
yeah, I sold my PolarStar the other day, and you know, not that it didn't work. It's just that I don't use it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that it bothered me. You know, I have all these tanks. I have the regulator. I dropped probably close to $2,000 into my PolarStar.
Yeah.
And
that's the other thing. You got to pay for it. You
yeah.
want that consistency, you got to pay for it. I know guys that, you know, tricked out their LM4s with the Evo kits and everything like that, and it only cost them like nowhere near as much. They just got a new barrel and a new Evo set, and they did it properly, and they made all those fine-tuned adjustments, and their gun is shooting great. And they shaved off the rocket valve a little bit, and bada bing, bada boom, they got a gun now that's just cranking out rounds, and it cost them nowhere near. And you think it would cost them more, but it cost them nowhere near. I think the most expensive aspects were the mags. Like the gun cost $379, and then after that, they went ahead and they got a it cost them $379. They got the Evo kit put into it, which I think was around $30-40. They got a new barrel in it, which I think was around $80 or $90. And then after that, you know, it was just mags, and it cost them like somewhere in the ballpark when all was said and done, like $700-800. But with PolarStars, like, you know, especially depending on which one that you were getting, it was costing anywhere from $1,000 and up after you upgraded it. Now, because you need your tank, which costs.
Tanks are about $160 to $200.
And then your regulator, which costs
$175.
And then your actual line, which costs.
No, that comes with the regulator.
It comes with the line. So you have $170, $200.
And
let's
the thing
say.
is, if you're a heavy PolarStar user, you got to buy 2 tanks.
2 tanks.
It really depends on how trigger happy you are, but if you buy an SLP rig, which I did, that's like a $250 tank if you put it on a 90 CI tank with a 4,500 PSI rating. So, I mean, I had 2 tanks, 2 carbon fiber tanks. So that right there, that's almost, it's past $300. Add the regulator, now you're at close to $600. Then the PolarStar engine itself, that was $500.
Yeah, $450, $500.
$450 now. And
your gun itself.
Add the shell of the gun along with the inner barrel, the hop up, like all that kind of stuff.
All the custom internal work.
Yeah.
All the nozzles.
So it gets really, really expensive.
And you got to be prepared for that. Like and I'm not trying to do this to determine, like, this is Rants and airsofter. So like, I'm gonna be straight up honest. I see where PolarStars are at. I think they're a great setup. They're cool. I don't use them. You know, I don't. I have my KWA M16 back there, which has been flat hopped, and I'm getting 240 feet, 250 feet, 260 feet, and I'm fine with that. If you want to go crazy and you want to try getting setups that are out to 331 feet, which is possible, there's nothing, and I understand that, and it is possible. It's a feasible thing. If you want to do that, that's fine, but it's going to cost you a lot more money. So for an extra 80 feet, it's going to cost you an extra $1,500. You know, it's not going to be. It's not going to be.
And
if that.
And that 80 feet doesn't mean that, you know, you can't get hit.
Yeah.
Because you never know how close you are to somebody that they can reach out and still touch you.
Yeah.
But there are pros and cons to PolarStars, and it's like, especially the one thing is they're quiet. If you custom if you customize your gun so that way the barrel meets the very, very end of the gun, they are super quiet. I mean, I had a suppressor in mine, so it kind of amplified it a little bit. I took some foam and put it in the suppressor, and that thing was like, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, when you're shooting at guys, and you know to hear for the gearbox sound, you hear that, and it's like, okay, someone's shooting at me. Well, when you're shooting at somebody, and they don't know that you're shooting at them until they hear the BBs hitting off of everything around them and hitting their friends.
Yeah.
That's when it's like people get really scared.
And that's also great for rec setups. Like if you're trying to do like a recon loadout with like a ghillie suit, those are probably one of the best effective systems that you can get because they're quiet. Like what I always recommend to people, like if they really want a good recon loadout, is get a non-blowback Tokyo Marui Mark 23. Those things work great in the cold. They work great in the warm weather. There's no blowback to them. They're made of plastic. The magazines are obviously made of metal. You can get a lot of rounds off even in the cold before you have to go ahead and change mags or something like that. And it's quiet. The suppressor that goes on it actually makes the gun quiet. And then you have that plus your PolarStar setup, and that's like that's the perfect recon. No one's ever going to hear you. Like if you actually have guys that are well trained and know what they're doing, you got a good PolarStar setup with exactly how it was explained by General Mills, and bada bing, bada boom, you're out in the field just cranking people. It's insane. Like it's a really efficient and effective tool. It just you got to be able to invest the money into it.
It's very tough too, and the reason that they don't break down as much is because PolarStars only have 2 moving parts, where a normal gearbox you have 30.
Yeah.
So a lot more could go wrong. But the thing is, PolarStars have their own issues.
Yeah.
That you don't get with an AEG, and
yeah. I was always trying to figure out, like when these things came out, everybody was like, you don't need to clean them. And all of a sudden, but I would hear like everyone's gun would go down.
Yeah, I mean that's not true at all. I mean, I never had any issues with mine, but
it's like when AR-15 M16s came out. You don't need to clean it. Yeah, you need to clean it.
Well, yeah, you need to clean it like any other gun. But one of the things is you need to grease the gearbox, the PolarStar gearbox.
We need to grease AEG gearboxes too.
Well, yeah, but everyone thinks that it's a PolarStar, it can handle it. It's not true.
Yeah, lube and anything's good. Especially like any kind of that's one of the things that I always love. I was watching a Vickers tactical video the other day. I watch random gun videos as well, and he did a joke where he actually took a massive container of like machine oil that you'd put in the engine of your car and poured a Daniel Defense AR in it and an M92F Beretta and just dumped it in oil. And he's like, you can never overlube your guns. He's like, you can never overlube your guns.
One of the other things I really liked about the PolarStar is that if you want to change your FPS, you break down your gun and unscrew one screw, and you can take out the nozzle and change out the nozzle.
Yeah.
And that nozzle actually bumped you up anywhere from about 30 to 60 FPS.
Yeah.
Which that's really good if you want to go from outdoor to CQB. You just change out one nozzle and you're good to go.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the cool things too, because it's so much better than a quick spring system on a lot of the guns that I've been seeing. Because except for the Crytek ones that are now out, where you just open them up, and it's not exactly a quick change spring system, but you don't got to disassemble the whole gearbox. It's kind of cool how you just open it, unscrew it, and then just do that.
And also, if you want to save more air and you don't really care about your rounds per second as much, you could change it to one of the higher velocity nozzles and then turn down your air pressure on your regulator.
Yeah.
And that way you're saving more air, but you're still getting the same FPS out of your gun. You're just not going to get the same rounds per second. But you know what? If you're at a field like Zulu, where most of the time you're in only,
yeah,
that really doesn't matter too much. But especially when I was out there, I barely ever put it in full auto because there's too many people out on the field, and it was just like, you know what, we got to do semi-only. So yeah, I bumped up the nozzle and turned down my air pressure.
Events at bigger places where they can accommodate more people. I mean, we mostly play in Sulu, and we obviously, as you can tell, and we enjoy it. The guys there are great. I mean, they allow us to go out and do all kinds of stuff, and they are ones that allow us to do our event and everything, and they're really chill, and that's kind of where we go. But we're going to be testing out other places soon too, and I think we're going to be doing, what is that, Blood or whatever.
No, Bad Blood.
Yeah.
I'm not sure because it's closing.
Oh,
A lot of the teams are closing up, so I don't know if we're gonna get on that.
So, but we are trying to get out there more and do like different fields and stuff like that. So it's really cool. We got some pretty cool news that's going to be coming out soon when Rockhound gets back on, and I'll save that for that. But yeah, it really depends on. This isn't as much of a rant on an airsoft. Like there's pros and cons to everything. Like I'm a teacher. He's a teacher. Rockhound's a teacher. Shifty's a teacher. We teach. And one of the best things that we always know about teaching is you're going to learn more than you're going to teach. And I think that's something that, and whenever you look at something, you got to understand that there's pros and cons to everything. And there's different ways that you can view something. This wouldn't be as much of a rant as it would be just kind of us just saying, hey, like, look, there's you could do PolarStars and there's pros and cons to it. You can do gas guns and there's pros and cons to it. You can do AEG guns and there's pros and cons to it. You know, everybody, and then you have specialists in every single field that know what they're talking about, and you know, and that can really crank out these guns to what their optimal is supposed to be. You know, but it really comes down to what fits good for you. You know, yeah, you can get insane accuracy with a PolarStar and pop it out to insane distances, but you're going to be spending money to do it. You know, and you're going to need a lot of time and energy to be able to form it out. You can do insane accuracies with AEGs. It's still going to cost you money. Same thing with gas guns. It's still going to cost you money. It's what you're looking for when you go out there. And the pros and cons are, you know, there. Like AEG pros and cons. Like, I love AEGs. That's all I use except for my sidearms. But pros and cons for AEGs. Wire harnesses. People hate them. People absolutely hate wire harnesses. The recoil setups for AEGs are terrible. You know, the ERG is the closest thing, but it's still nowhere near what you would get out of a gas blowback gun. Or anything even close to realistic-wise.
Let's bring it back to PolarStars for a second, and that was one of the things I realized with mine.
Was it BB hose?
Is no, the FCU, you need a little battery to power it. And so that means you have to charge the battery the night before, as well as get the tanks filled. And one of the things that I realized is one day I left the battery attached to the FCU. And it was in there for probably maybe 5 days, and battery was, of course, dead by the time that, even though PolarStar FCUs are very efficient, they actually do not draw that much energy, and that's why the battery is so tiny. It's smaller than a quarter. But, yeah, it was just, it actually, because it doesn't take so much power, it took all the energy out of the battery to the point where it depleted it completely, and I actually had to buy a new PolarStar battery.
Yeah, LiPo batteries die if you drain them.
So, yeah, you can't leave the battery in the gun at all.
That's the same thing for MOSFETs, I think. I don't know, MOSFETs don't do it. It's a cutoff switch, but it does drain the battery. So, like, if you keep it in there, it will do that.
Yeah, so you just gotta watch. But you know what? PolarStars aren't a bad thing at all. I mean, I owned one. It was a great gun. But you know what? When you have so many of them, it's a matter of what field you're at, what the uses are for it. It's just, there's so many factors that it depends on the person.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I think we're just going to do part 1 and part 2 for this.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's all we pretty much wanted to end it on. So, like always, drop your mags, clear barrels, and we'll see you next time on